Dogworks Radio is sponsored by Alaska Dogworks. Check out their website at alaskadogworks.com.
You can support this podcast on patreon.com/firstpawmedia.
This episode of the podcast is brought to you by First Paw Coffee Company, specializing in private label premium blend coffee. If you're serious about coffee, you should check it out. First Paw Coffee's passion is high-quality, small-batch roasted coffee. They take the extra time to taste and get everything perfect before they release new blends. They aim to bring you a cup of happiness each time you pour yourself some coffee. Find out more at ak.dog/free and enter for a chance to win some First Paw Coffee prizes, a book from our collection, and tote bag. One winner will be selected at random each month. That's ak.dog/free.
Radio Free Palmer 89.5 KVRF presents Mushing Radio, hosted by Robert Forto. Mushing Radio is about dog-powered sports, living in the Great White North, and mushing. Visit our website at mushingradio.com. Here is your host, Robert Forto.
Hello and welcome, everybody. This is Robert Forto, and you're listening to our continued Iditarod coverage here on KVRF 89.7 in the Mat-Su Valley. RadioFreePalmer.org is our live streaming site. You can find us on social media by searching Dogworks Radio and on dogworksradio.com. That's where you can find all of our old episodes. And just a quick reminder, folks, just about everybody that we have talked about in our Musher profiles so far has done an interview at one time or another on our podcast. And I think it's always cool to go back and listen to those. And I say that because we got a message on YouTube today where they said that they are going to go back and listen to all of our previous year's Iditarod podcasts. Now that is a dedicated fan for sure. But hey, if people are listening to 10-year-old Iditarod coverage, more power to them. And I know that people watch those Iditarod videos that were done every year. Toni, I know you're a super fan. Do you watch those older Iditarod videos?
Oh, you know I do. I have all of the DVDs going back to 2005. I have some of the VHSs from when PBS did specials. So I have 1980s and 90s stuff. And I even tweeted about crying over the same documentary I cry over every year that Insider did, I think almost 10 years ago, called Purely Alaskan, talking about those first 10 years basically of mushing, and then it goes all the way to whichever year. I think it was Lance Mackey's last year was the culmination of the entire documentary. And I'm sitting there, they were playing it the other day on Insider during the 24-hour break. And I'm just sitting there at my work desk crying again. And I'd already watched it and cried like 2 weeks ago. So, yeah, it's a big deal. And I say kudos to anyone who's using all the resources available to learn about the amazing athletes, mushers, and the history of the Iditarod. There's 50 years to find out about. So,
and we have an update on that 50-year anniversary with one of the mushers and something special he did this year, and we definitely want to talk about that. So let's get to the standings. As we're recording this, it's about 6 o'clock Alaska time, and right now we have 20 mushers into Nome. We still have, that would be 24 mushers out on the trail. Currently, the next mushers in, let's go down for who has finished. Brent Sass, Dallas Seavey, Jesse Holmes, Dan Caduce, Pete Kaiser, Richie Deal, Chad Stoddard, Aaron Burmeister, Ryan Reddington, Aaron Peck, Yor Olsom, Travis Beals, Ramey Smith, Millie, and I know I'm saying that, Porsled, Matt Hall, Mitch Seavey, Michelle Phillips, Les Schwartz, Hannah Lyric, Paige Dromby have finished. And we have Mats Peterson, Martin Massacati, Christy, and Anna Barrington all in White Mountain. And in the Red Lantern spot, we still have Lisbeth Norris, who is on her way from Uniclete from Caltag. We have a Payak, Yuka Honda, Kalen Davis and Eric Kelly. They're in the back of the pack. That has not changed in many, many days. I think probably from maybe the third or fourth day, those guys have been at the back of the pack. Usually, not usually, but occasionally you'll see somebody really slip down from, 10 spots or so and end up in that back of the pack. But we have not seen that this year. So that's a good thing that nobody has slipped back, and it appears that everybody is moving along on the trail. We can report that Hannah Lyric, who we spoke about several times on the show, had a top 20 finish with a 19th place and will almost certainly get the Rookie of the Year. We have a story, as I mentioned just a minute ago, about Pete Kaiser. What can you tell us about his run and his commemorative that he did for the 50th Iditarod?
Sure. So Pete Kaiser did end up fifth. He raced his good buddy and rival Richie Deal for that spot and ended up sticking right there at number 5. He was carrying the ashes of Dick Wilmarth, who was from the Kotzebue area. And Dick Wilmarth, for those who may not know, Dick is the original Iditarod champion. He was the first one to cross the finish line of Kool-Aid and Nome. He was a one and done. He won it and he never came back, but he's still very much a part of Iditarod lore and tradition. And so he just passed away. I want to say it was last year or the year before. And Pete was asked to take some of his ashes along the Iditarod trail and take them to Nome one more time. So when Pete came under the Burled Arch late last night, he had those ashes in his hand and they gave him the microphone and he was able to give a little tribute to the very first Iditarod champion. And that was just such a great way to kind of encapsulate the 50th running and really bring it back to that legacy of the very first race that no one even thought was going to finish or, anybody was going to be able to complete. And now here we are 50 years later and it's still going strong. It looks much different than what Wilmarth saw, but at the heart of it, it's the same race.
Toni, are you aware that we're still under 1,000 people that have finished in all of those years?
I don't know the exact number. I think it was something like 800 and something the last time I looked. So yeah, it's a huge accomplishment. We used to say when I did tours for the CV kennels, we used to say that more people had climbed Mount Everest that had finished the Iditarod. So it's not surprising that the number is still so low. This is a tough race. I think it's proven itself time and again that it might be considered the Hollywood race, quote unquote. But it's a tough race, and I'm watching all of these interviews going, yeah, I still have no desire to be a musher and do this.
For sure. So right before we went on to air, we got a message from one of our followers on social media, and you were talking about a story that came out on Alaska Public Media, I believe is the correct pronunciation of that, about Brent Sass and two-way communication. And as we logged on, my trusty assistant here, my wife Michelle, pulled up Rule 35, and we're going to talk about why this rule is important in just a second. But these are the 2022 rules, and it says, Rule 35, electronic devices. A musher may carry and use two-way communication devices, including but not limited to cell phone or satellite. Use of such devices may not be used for any media purposes during the course of the race unless expressly approved in advance by the ITC. So, with that being said, what was reported on Alaska Public Media?
So it was an interview that they did with Brent about his run from White Mountain to Nome. Of course, we know that, he hunkered down for over an hour as he came out of the hills and went towards what's known as the blowhole. And he was getting hit with at least 60-mile-an-hour wind gusts. And so in the process of telling this story, he hunkered down just a mile away from a shelter cabin, but he couldn't get his dogs that way. They had gotten hit and rolled down a mountain. You have to find, I've linked it on my Twitter, but you have to find this interview because there are video of just what it looked and felt like. And it's an incredible interview. But something that I think a lot of people have noticed, I've gotten several messages on it today. And even when I was reading the interview, it piqued my curiosity, and I'm still not sure how I feel about it. But he said in one part, when he did finally make it to the shelter cabin and hunkered down there, he was texting back and forth with his friend Mike Ellis, who is another musher and has run the Iditarod. And he mentioned that at one point Mike texts him and says, "Hey, Dallas is only 11 miles behind you. Get your butt out of there and get back on the trail." And that's what Brent did. And so while it's not expressly forbidden anymore to get that kind of help, it did rub, I know at least the people messaging me, it did rub them the wrong way, asking, why is this okay? Why is he even admitting this? It's not against the rules as I read it now. But I understand why fans feel that it's kind of taking some of the magic and the fun out of racing if they know exactly where someone is at any given time. So I don't even know really how I feel about it. I kind of lean on the side of I don't really like it, but I don't know. From a musher's perspective, maybe you can have a few opinions on that.
A couple of thoughts. I remember when this rule went into place, and we talked last night or the night before about how Brent Sass was DQ'd several years ago because he had an iPod on the trail. And at that time, you couldn't have any device that communicated back and forth, that two-way communication, other than the emergency tracker, they've been around for years. But he got in trouble for that because he had an iPod that had the ability to connect to Wi-Fi or cellular. And of course, in most places on the trail, that is not available. But I guess because of that, he was DQ'd. And then they posted this new rule that allowed for the two-way communication. And I remember when that first came out, Alex and I had long discussions about it, about how it could be used, how it could be abused, what our thoughts are on it. Will it be the new iteration of coaching on the Iditarod Trail? And I think we talked about the front runners doing exactly what you just talked about, where they reach out to their handlers and say, "Hey, where's Dallas?" Oh, Dallas is exactly what you said. He's 10 miles out. Or what are the conditions on the way to Ruby? What's the weather report, et cetera, et cetera. Different information than you would hear at the checkpoint. And of course, there's lots of information there from the checkers and all of that. And I'm sure that has gone on many, many times over the years since it has developed. And we're going to talk in just a minute about Martin Booser and something he had said when he called home in one of these later checkpoints about his mushergrams, and also when he called home earlier in the race to tell the story about the moose incident with Matt Failer. So obviously communication is happening. So we cannot deny that. Whether it's a strategy is, I think, something else entirely. I don't have a problem with it. I think it's akin to the pit crew in NASCAR. When you're in NASCAR, those pit crews are telling you exactly what's happening on the trail. Hey, I don't know any NASCAR members, but number 2 is in the pit, or number 4 is low on tire pressure, or whatever. They're giving the drivers that information, and I think it's sort of akin to that. And I know we talked last night about how you do not want Iditarod to be the next NASCAR, but I think that this is just another one of those sign of the times. I don't see it as a problem. It doesn't look, by reading in the rules, and Michelle had just passed that rule over to me as we were talking, It doesn't say anything about that communication. You just cannot contact the media. And I think that is there more than anything about that media contact is because the Iditarod wants to control the narrative. I think that is their sole reason why that part of the rule is there. What do you think about that exception or non-exception to the rule about the media?
Right. I think that's another thing that's probably also Iditarod insider influence, because you do see a lot of the mushers going live now on either different smaller races. I've seen it, especially on something like the Willow 300, or just posting videos and pictures while they're on the trail. And Insider really likes to be the only true source of Iditarod. They make it very clear that volunteers are not to share pictures of their work until after the race is over. And we sign a contract, and it's right there. It's a media clause. It's not necessarily from the ITC board. It's a media contract and clause. And so that makes me lean more towards, Insider wants to control, yes, the narrative, but they also want to control who's producing what. We've seen, I think Cale Casey wrote a big, long thing right before Iditarod started about how he had media credentials, but Insider was very upset with how he was producing and sharing that media content that he was getting. And that's not the only person that's had those complaints, even when they are credentialed to do exactly what they're doing. So I think that might be where that clause in that rule comes from. That's just me speculating. I've never heard anybody explain exactly every line of that rule. I do feel that two-way communication is a good thing on the trail when you have something like what happened to Allie and Jeff in 2016 when they were attacked outside of New Lotto. Had Allie possibly been able to call in before getting to the checkpoint, maybe something could have been done to where Jeff wouldn't have been attacked, or other mushers were also buzzed and harassed. My understanding is on that, but didn't get the press that, of course, Allie and Jeff did. So there's little things. I understand, why they changed the rule. I think it's a good change. I just personally, I don't really like the idea of a pit crew, but I understand where it is. And I do think that more mushers will take advantage of it now that Brent's apparently able to talk about it openly and nobody's coming down on it.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see if anything develops over this, and obviously it has the fans speaking about it. And speaking of the fans, Toni, over the last 24 hours after our discussion about cryptocurrency and Bitcoin, my social media has been back and forth with several of our listeners about that, and it seems to me I am in the extreme minority with what people think. Is that what you're kind of hearing as well?
I've only been involved in the one or two of those messages, and you were tagged in it as well. But yeah, I've gotten a few tweets saying, "Yeah, you're right, Toni. Robert," and they're talking about Robert Urbach. They're not going after you. They're going after Urbach, saying that of all the things to be focused on, that's not the one to focus on.
Yeah. It's interesting how people feel, and that's why we do this show. Is we want to make it a back and forth as much as possible. So let's move on. We're going to talk a little bit about Martin Booser, and he's always a fan favorite, multi-time Iditarod winner. He is an excellent storyteller, the whole 9 yards. Definitely somebody that a lot of people follow along the trail. And one of the cool things that you can do on the trail is send the mushers what they call Mushergrams. And I thought for sure, Toni, when we went on the air at our kickoff show, that we said that they were not doing Mushergrams this year, but that's not the case?
That's not. I had talked to Iditarod ahead of time because I knew that was one of Alex's big things that he always promoted here on the the podcast as well as on social media, because it is a really great, fun thing that fans can do to cheer on their mushers when they're out there in the wilderness. But I messaged to make sure, because last year they weren't doing Mushergrams. So I asked Iditarod. Iditarod sent back, no, because of a short staff of volunteers, we're unable to do Mushergrams this year. So I, had permission to go ahead and give out that information. And I swear, not one day after the Iditarod started, they're like, hey, guess what's back? Mushergrams. Really, guys? Really? Like, in 72 hours, you changed your mind, which I'm glad they did. Don't get me wrong, but I'm like, now I'm sitting here going, thank God I screen capped and shared that screen cap when I originally announced no Mushergrams, because otherwise people would have thought I was just making stuff up. But I did. I went to the source, and the source decided to change its mind. That's my official stance on that.
So Martin said in a post today, whether it was one of these calls that we were talking about or a video interview he did with Insider or whoever, he said that he always keeps the Mushergrams and puts them in his return drop bags. And what a return drop bag is, if you have stuff that you want to see returned back to you, whether it's clothing or extra booties or pretty much anything besides food, can be returned, and it often takes weeks to get there. I know I've helped pick up return drop bags well into April when they finally get back to Iditarod headquarters in Wasilla. But anyway, you can return stuff back, and one thing that Martin does is he keeps these Mushergrams in his drop bag so he can keep them as keepsakes. But I think we need to do a quick step back, Toni. What is a Mushergram, and how does somebody do one?
Sure. So a Mushergram is basically like a telegram for those of you too young to know what a telegram is. Back in the day, even before us, instead of email, the quickest way to get information across the country was to send a telegram, which was kind of like Morse code sent through wires and processed at another telegram office and then given to whoever you were sending it to. It's kind of the same thing, only instead of doing it over telegram wire, what happens is you call into the phone room at Iditarod headquarters, and they dictate your Mushergram to whichever musher you choose. And then from there, they've written it down. They send it out on the next plane, basically, that's going to whatever checkpoint is up ahead from that musher. So say Martin, we're going to say he's further back here, but say he's in Unalakleet and they don't have any flights going to Shaktoolik, but they're sending out Iditarod Air Force to Koyuk. Well, then they're going to take the Mushergram along with whatever else they're taking out to that checkpoint. They're going to leave it there with the volunteers there. And when the musher comes in, they are handed any Mushergrams that they may have received. And so this has been going on, I think, through most of the Iditarod. I think at one point they were relayed by ham radio, and volunteers were writing them down there in the checkpoints. Now they just get flown out. I think it would be something easy that they could digitize, and so they wouldn't necessarily need as many volunteers, but maybe just, have somebody working that email and making sure that, they're kosher, that nothing horrible is being written. They're not being told, to go fly off a cliff or something, or we're getting a lot of animal rights crap sent to them. But that's beside the point. But yeah, so then the musher, they can read it. I assume most of them do put them in the sled bags or the return bags so that they can actually read them when they're conscious and can actually understand and decipher what is being said. I will tell a story on Mushergrams. When I was in Nome for 2019, I was unable to follow the race via internet unless I was at the community center that they use for Iditarod headquarters up there. And so I'm standing there at the computer, and in another room right next to it was, I believe it was Jesse Royer and Travis Fields. And they have just mounds of pizza because they were getting sent pizza by fans. But they also had stacks of Mushergrams, like a ridiculous stack of these Mushergrams. And Jesse Royer's reading them. And all of a sudden, all I hear really loud is, "Who the heck are ugly dogs?" And I think that was the first time Iditarod really understood just how big that fandom was and how important it would end up being for the next few years, because the ugly dogs have a spreadsheet, is my understanding, so that they can make sure that every musher gets a Mushergram, which I think is so awesome.
Yeah, that's
basically Mushergram.
Yeah, that is a cool thing, and I hope that can continue, whether it's digital or whatever, because I think that's a very unique part of Iditarod, is to be able to do that, and it really does harken back to those early days where back in the Serum Run days, and of course this is not necessarily associated with Iditarod. That's a touchy subject on all levels, but of course that's how messages were sent down the trail from one musher to another, was by telegram, and that's how they figured out where Sepla was, or whomever was on the trail, and that's how it was done. And I think that is a cool way to continue that. So let's jump over and talk about sportsmanship. And I know that this was a topic you wanted to mention in particular this year. We've heard a bunch of stories about some faster mushers on the trail giving up their sled to mushers that were behind them. And that's really proved to be pivotal for a bunch of those guys and gals. You have a story about a musher yesterday that got Mitch's sled. Who is that, and what did they say?
Sure. So Mel Porsled, who actually ended up beating Mitch by several places, she had broken her sled before reaching Unilacleat, and she had been fixing it and trying to get it there, but it was to the point where it was almost in non-repair. A lot of the mushers have reported breaking the runners on their sled where they're standing, and breaking like aluminum and metal to do that. So really difficult then, is my understanding, is to get any sort of control over where that sled goes when you don't have a runner that's working properly. She had help earlier, I believe, from both Mitch and Pete Kaiser in jury rigging a fix for that runner so that she could continue using it. But by Unilacleat, it just wasn't panning out. And so Mitch said, hey, I have an extra sled here, go ahead and take it. And she took it, and she was doing somewhat well with it. But she mentioned in her post-race Q&A that they do right there under the arch that it took some time learning how to handle the sled, which I'm going to ask you, Robert, what that all might entail. Because for me, I mean, the sleds are all different sizes and builds, and, they have sled bags that are different sizes and builds. But a sled should be a sled, right? It should, go left, right, however you want it. But she said that she fell over several times just in the last leg of from Safety to Nome, and I think even in the last mile. And she said it was because she didn't know how to drive his sled. I think the quote was, I think Mitch is secretly trying to kill me. But yeah, that's just one of like 5 stories that we've told, most of them throughout the podcast, of mushers giving sleds. There are mushers that are helping out. I know Jeff King has been helped out by getting food from different people's drop bags, taking pity on him when he doesn't necessarily have what he needs or what they think he needs. There's been sharing of runner plastic and all of that. And that's something that I think just in general, this sport does better than any other sport, is have sportsmanship. Even though, like in the case of Mill and Mitch, she is like she ended up 3 or 4 places higher than he did in the top 20. And yet, he knows that she's his competitor. and he's totally fine with her taking a sled that may, take her ahead of him. So I just found that really interesting, and also the idea that, you'd have to learn how to drive somebody else's sled.
Yeah, and I'll mention those thoughts here in just a second, but there is a special award that's given to a musher at the banquet. It's the Sportsmanship Award. Is that the award that's voted on by the other mushers?
Yes.
And how is that conducted? Is it post-race or what? Or do you know?
It is, yeah. It's post-race. I think they do that, as people come in. I don't actually know how they do these votings because they also do, of course, the Golden Clipboard is one that all of the mushers vote on. So my assumption is, once they're awake, and because they all end up at HQ at Race Central there in Nome, they probably have a ballot or, can just write on a piece of paper, hey, this is what I think about, the upcoming awards on Sunday.
And that's one of those highly coveted awards. If you win that award, that's really saying something, because you're typically putting somebody else above yourself in one capacity or another, whether it's giving out a sled or helping out somebody on the trail. And we've heard stories over the years. I remember stories about the Mushing mortician, Scott Jansen, and his heroics out on the trail. And that's just one that comes to mind. But almost every Iditarod, we tell one of these sportsmanship or heroic type stories, and they're always good ones to follow. In terms of the sled itself, of course, sleds come in all shapes and sizes. It's, and often that sled is built for that particular person. A lot of mushers build their own sleds using their own materials and techniques that they like to use. I'm thinking of Dallas CV right off the top. But a big one is, of course, the height of the sled. And Michelle was kind of doing a ruler measurement where she's only 5'2" and I'm 5'10", so my sled is going to be much taller than her sled. So that's an automatic 8-inch advantage. And it's very similar to driving a car that's not yours. You have to adjust the seats and the mirrors and all of that stuff. Often you just can't jump in a car and say, yep, everything's great, I'm going to take it around the block. So that's one thing. Second thing is the way that it flexes or sort of drives down the trail. Some sleds are very stiff. In particular, the less modern type sleds, especially the lashed ones or the wooden style of old, those are typically stiffer type sleds. And nowadays they have all sorts of fancy materials that they make sleds out of, whether it be graphite or aluminum or whatever. You can almost lay a sled on its side. And I remember one of the stories we talked about earlier in our coverage was about your Olsum sled, how he said that it was a sled that he could practically lay on the ground without much effort. And I guess he's using something different this year or something of that effect. And then lastly, my report on sleds is the weakest part of the sled is where the stanchion attaches to the runner, pretty much right where the handlebars are. There's usually a spot or two on the sled where the down tubes are attaching to those aluminum runners. And often that's right where the musher's foot goes. It's where the brake is, it's where the drag is, all of that. And nowadays, almost everybody's using the same aluminum runners. They're called QCR runners, and they're made that way out of really lightweight aluminum, so you can quickly switch out the runner plastic. And often, depending on conditions, you may switch out that plastic once or twice in a race. It's not like in the old days where they had wooden runners and they would, bolt on the plastic and use wax and all sorts of other stuff to make their sleds go a little faster. Nowadays, the mushers will ship out plastic several times in different checkpoints along the trail in their drop bags, and they do that so they can change those out. But with that being so, that makes the strength of the sled suspect. And I would bet almost all of these sleds broke right there. And you had mentioned that it's hard to drive. it's almost the best way I can put it is, I'm sure you guys, if we're not too old, we were talking about old enough to do telegraphs. If you're not old enough to have ever seen the Flintstones, it's like the Flintstones were driving their cars. Remember back in the day, Tony, where they'd have to drive with their feet? That's sort of what it's like if you have a broken runner. You're kind of playing catch up and running Flintstone style down the trail if you don't have anything to put your feet on. Or it's sort of like going downhill with skis and you losing a ski halfway down the run. It's a very similar type thing. And if a person can drive that way, more power to them. Thankfully, most of us have learned to drive on two runners, and I call it keeping your snow legs. If you can do that, it's all well. But that's sort of my take on the sleds and the sportsmanship at will. What else do you have for us, Toni, before we jump over to our musher profile?
Well, this isn't anything that we talked about before going and recording, but I do think that we also need to mention Dan Caduce. Not only did he have his highest finish ever there in 4th place, he did so with all 14 dogs from start to finish. They looked great coming in, really strong. Line was tight all the way to the finish. And that's a huge accomplishment. The only other one that I can think of being so high up in the rankings was Jessie Royer in 2017. She came in 5th, and that was when they were still running teams of 16 dogs. And I remember, I think she won both the Humanitarian Award and the Most Inspirational that year. So I think, talking about awards, I think the Humanitarian Award, which is one of the most coveted awards in any dog sled race, because that's the one that is given out to those who take the best care of their dogs throughout the race. I think his name should be right up there at the top of the running. If you can get all 14 of your dogs to look that good at the end of the race, you're doing something amazingly well. I know he said it was luck, but his dog care is always one of the best, I think, in the race.
And Toni, do you know who votes on that award? Is that the vets or the checkers or the mushers, or who? Do you know?
I believe that it's just the vets, maybe the race officials too, but I believe it's the vets that choose that award.
Very good. All right, so let's talk about our musher profile of the evening. And if you guys are astute listeners last night, even though we had our longest show ever, with the exception, I believe, when Alex and I stuck around for the live finish when we were on regular radio, we forgot to mention our musher profile for tonight. And Toni and I did kind of spaced it out. We didn't even talk about it this afternoon or on our call right before. We decided that we were going to come up with somebody on the fly, and we were looking down our list, trying to figure out who we knew the most about where we didn't have to do any research. And we came up with the Barrington twins, Christy and Anna Barrington. Yes. Yes. So that is who we're talking about tonight. They are a couple of local mushers, live right there in the Kinnick area. We talked about that area a few nights ago when we covered Eric Kelly. I believe they live pretty close to Eric, at least in the same general vicinity. But these two ladies, they are a great set of ambassadors for the sport of mushing. Not only are they fan favorites, but they really go out of their way to really promote the sport, in particular on Instagram. And I've known those guys for a long time. I love racing with them at our local dryland races here in the fall. Just a great couple of sisters. What do you know about the Barrington girls?
Sure. Well, they grew up in Wisconsin and then decided to move up to Alaska to really get into the adventure of dog mushing. They cut their teeth here in the Kasilof area down my way. So, the Tuscamina 200 is one of the races that they loved to do even after they moved up to Kinnick. They trained with Paul Gebhardt and Dean Osmar and Tim Osmar. And I think they still borrow quite a few dogs from Dean Osmar when necessary. They always run together, which I think it is one of the reasons why fans just absolutely love them. They love that human interest story. I have heard some old school mushers there when I've just been sitting around listening to them talk either in Iditarod headquarters or out at other races, and they get so frustrated because they know that they could be more competitive if they didn't just always run together. But that's something that Christy and Anna want to do. They want to do this together, and you can't argue with that. They are, like you said, really great ambassadors of the sport. Even though they aren't necessarily top 10 finishers, they do get a lot of really good sponsorships. They are sponsored by GCI, which is one of the main sponsors of Iditarod, but they also promote a lot of different Alaskan athletes. That's just the one that comes off the top of my head, but they are really well known and respected in the mushing community. Christy, of course, is married to Andy Pohl, who is one of those crazy Iditarod Trail bikers. And that's how they met and fell in love. They met in Ophir. So that is, again, another way that, you know, the human interest story just grew their fan base. And they are two of the most lovable people. I love chatting with them. They're always really encouraging and open. And if I don't say hi, Christy comes and hunts me down and says hi. Just really open, caring people, very, very good with their fans, and especially with their dogs. They care about those dogs, and at the end of the day, that's what's important to them. So they can come in, 20th place, they can come in 40th place. That's not their ultimate goal. They want to be better every time they go out, but ultimately it's about having fun with each other and with their dogs.
Yeah, and you had mentioned going out of their way to say hello, and I don't know how many times over the years where I've been in the local grocery store and one of the sisters will come up and say hello and talk for a few minutes, and they just see me down the aisle. And I think that's how they are with everybody. It seems like they're just that friendly with everybody. And I'm looking quickly at their stats, Toni. It looks like Christy started first. She started in 2010. She has ran, it looks like, every year, so 11 years for Christy. Her best finish was 16th place in 2019, where she did the race in 10 days, 23 hours. And then let's go over quickly to Anna. Anna, where are they? There they are. Anna has been racing since 2012, so 2 years later than Christy, and she has ran every year as well. And, of course, they ran together in 2019 as well, and she was just a little bit behind her sister at 10 days, 23 hours, and a few minutes right behind. So we talked a lot about that, traveling along the trail together. We had mentioned it when we covered Jeff and Katie Jo Dieter a few days ago. And, of course, the back of the Packers, how they travel together as well. So these two ladies have made it an art to do this, and they've done this together for I don't know how many years. I remember several years ago, before they started traveling together, you would often see, and I don't know which one was ahead or not, but one of them was usually a little bit more competitive than the other. Do you recall which one that was?
I think it was typically Christy, and I think that was just because at the time they were running out of different kennels, and so they had different schedules. I think Christy was running more dogs out of Gebhardt's kennel, and Anna typically ran more out of Osmar's kennel. So I think Christy was just naturally a little more competitive because of of that. And then when they did break off and start their own kennel, Seeing Double Racing Kennel, they, I think, had to build up their program before they had two teams of dogs that were on the same level, that, you know, one wasn't having to either be held back or the other one had to race harder than what they really should have been. So they've really grown their program in a really impressive way. And they've broken the top 20 several times, I think, now, doing that. So I know that they get some criticism in certain circles because one isn't just going ahead and being the competitive one and the other one run the B team. They're wanting to run and really have that competitive shot together. And that does get them some criticism from talking heads. But I think that they're proving that you can have a program that goes 1 and 2 out of the same kennel. It's not going to happen overnight, and maybe it never happens to that extreme of 1 and 2. But a top 20 placement is always something to be excited about, and that their kennel did that in one fell swoop is pretty impressive.
And remember, only the top 20 are in the money, so to speak. So if you're not in contention for that top 20, it doesn't really matter in terms of money where you finish, because everybody, is it 20 now or is it 15?
I think it's still 20, because we're still talking, you're still seeing that even from Iditarod, where they're talking up the top 20, and that's normally because they're all in the money.
Right. So that 21st place down, they're going to get the exact same amount whether they finish 21st or 32nd or 44th. They're going to get the commemorative $1,049. So if they know that they're not ultra competitive, and of course I have no idea about their program, if they know that they're not going to be ultra competitive in a given year and break that top 20, why not just enjoy your time out there, spending a week plus with your sister out on the trail? I know that they spend a lot of time together otherwise, but when you're able to go out there and just sort of turn everything off and only focus on Iditarod, that's got to be a pretty cool thing to do with your sibling, I think.
I mean, I don't have a sister, and but I think, if you have that bond with your sibling, definitely celebrate it, because I'm jealous of any of those that have really tight sibling bonds.
And you had mentioned their website or their kennel name, Seeing Double Racing. I believe they are the only set of twins that have ever ran Iditarod. I know that there has been brothers and sisters and so on and so forth, but I don't think we've had any other twins. Is that right?
I don't think in Iditarod. I think there are other twins in mushing and racing, but I'm not sure if we've had another set of twins running, at least not in the same Iditarod.
Right, right.
I think they are the first and only.
So always a fun group to follow. Definitely check them out on their website and say hello to them on social media, in particular on Instagram, because that is where they spend a lot of their time. So we are not going to forget tonight. Before we go, we're going to mention our musher profile for tomorrow, and that's Mats Peterson. He is, I believe he's a Swedish musher, and he is one of just a couple, maybe 2 or 3 folks that were able to travel this year from Europe to be a competitor in this race. And I know Mats personally. I've met him a couple of times when he was doing his early Iditarod, so I have a story or two to share about him, and it will be a musher that doesn't get a lot of talk about in the Iditarod circles, but as we finish up our coverage today, you know that we're going to continue our coverage for the rest of the week through the banquet, and we're going to talk about stories that often you will not hear anywhere else. So with that, I'm going to close with Toni. Anything else before we go?
Just a little bit more on Christy and Anna. As you were talking, I remembered not only do they do Iditarod, which is a sled dog marathon, they also do marathons in the summer where they run And then Christy and Andy also do tandem bike racing. So that's fun too. They're one of those, they just love adventure, and I just felt like I needed to share that because as much as I love them, I still think they're crazy for running those ultra marathons. They come down for the Kenai River Marathon every September, which is normally pouring down rain, and then they come and they say, but we love it. And I just don't understand that any more than mushers going out in 60-mile-an-hour windstorms going, but we love it. So that's my thought for tonight.
For sure. So over the next 24 hours, we'll see a heck of a lot more mushers come in. So I'm going to ask the question to end the show. So Lisbeth is currently in last place in that Red Lantern spot. It's been a very long time, at least in the last 5, 6, or 7 years or so, since we had a Red Lantern winner not be in time for the banquet, which is on Sunday, late afternoon, early evening. Do you think that that's a possibility for this year?
I don't think so, because I do worry that Lisbeth is going to be ending her race when she gets to Unalakleet in a few hours. I'm looking at the GPS right now, and the rest of the back of the pack, they are in Shaktoolik, or just about into Shaktoolik. It looks like Apayak might blow through Shak and just start going over the sea ice. They're resting a little bit outside of the checkpoint. So I think everyone looks to be on schedule from Shaktoolik on to be there before Sunday. Maybe they come in as the banquet's happening, but I don't think we'll see it too far past that on Sunday.
Yep, and I love to tell the story about the banquet, and we will do that on Sunday as well. And Unalakleet, how far is that exactly from Nome?
Let's see. It's at mile 714. So from there, it's according to their thing, it's 975. Don't make me do math, but yeah, it's still a little ways away.
So about 260 miles plus that mandatory 8-hour rest.
Right. Yeah, in White Mountain. So I think we might be seeing an earlier finish than Nome for the All Siberian team.
Well, let's see what happens. We look forward to covering the race until the end. And on behalf of my co-host and all of our fans, we will see you guys tomorrow night. Goodbye.
From Dogworks Radio, this is Mushing Radio. We hope you enjoyed this episode, and we invite you to subscribe in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. You'll find a link on the episode notes. You can tap or swipe on the episode cover art, and you'll see some offers from our sponsors. You can support our show by supporting them. If you like what you have heard, we would love it if you could give us a 5-star rating and tell your friends how to subscribe too. Your hosts are Alex Stein and Robert Forto. Our producer is Robert Forto, created for Dogworks Radio.
So earlier, you learned about First Paw Coffee Company. Now I'm going to tell you about its Trailbreaker Blend. First Paw Coffee Company's Trailbreaker Blend is inspired by our love of the Northern Lights, frosty paws, and sled dog trails. How cool is that? The Trailbreaker Blend is a private label premium blend that was developed just for them. It's a medium dark roast from Central and South America, highlighting flavors of brown sugar, hazelnut, and plum. Be sure to go to ak.dog/free and enter to win a bunch of cool prizes. That's ak.dog/free.